Welcome back, everybody, to the Power of Story podcast. If you're tuned in on the Thrive After Sports podcast, thank you for tuning in there as well. I'm here with my big bro, Mr. Walter Bailey. What's going on, Walter?
Hey, Taj. Great to be here, man. I'm excited. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Walter and I connected on LinkedIn. I believe it was last year, might have even been 2019. But just to give you a little bit of background before we dive into Walter's amazing story, he is a two-time Rose Bowl champion with the Washington Huskies, and he went on to play professional football as well in the Canadian League. And now he's doing some amazing things with Dynamic Athlete Solutions, which we will dive into. But first and foremost, Walter, I just want to start out with your story. I mean, obviously, you were doing big things. You played corner. I played corner too. So,
Right.
that's near and dear to my heart. And
Yeah.
once you were done with your college career, you went over to play in the Canadian League for a little bit. And then what was life like after you finished playing football? Can you dive into that for the listeners a little bit?
Yes. Yeah. Well, the let's go back to 1993. I played having success in college. The real story of everything was I was supposed to be and I thought I was going to be a number one draft pick and all of these things. We went to the Rose Bowl. We did really well. We didn't do as well as we thought. And I didn't do as well as I thought going into the Rose Bowl. I got injured, went to the combine. I didn't get drafted. But to make a long story short, I tested positive for marijuana. I got a free agent deal with the New York Giants. My best friend was already playing for the Giants. So it was like, man, for me, it didn't matter that I didn't get drafted. I'm going to try to make the team. And so I was out there for about 4 months. And then I get the final call from Coach Reeves. And just, it broke my heart. I had never been cut before from anything, any sport. But he was like, man, because of your analysis, man, this is a business. He said, I believe you definitely would have made this team, but this is a business decision. So after I got cut, man, I wound up going to the first expansion team, which was the Sacramento Gold Miners, 1993. They had already started their season. So I think I came in game five or six of their season. So I played the rest of that season in 93 and it was fun in the Canadian League. What I can say is for myself, I really, I felt like, playing in the Canadian League, it was, it's past happy. I had some success, but I was really eager to try to get back to the NFL. And so what happened after that was I was under a 2-year contract during the fall. So maybe a month after the season. So not the fall, because it was winter. So winter, right when the season ended, right before New Year's, I was traded to the Grey Cup champions, which was the Edmonton Eskimos. So at that time, I had went on vacation and spent time with my best friend back in New York. And what happened was I was only wanting to play out that second year option. And so coming back, getting ready, and then go back in June to Edmonton, a new home. I was there for 4 months. And then, I was there for 4 days, I get cut again, right? And so I get cut not because of my ability, but because of a contract. What I did from that point, which was 1994, it was like, hey, what do I do? I have a decision to go back to Portland, continue to work out, or do I just go get my vehicle and go back to Seattle, man, and start partying? So I chose the latter, man. I went back and I can tell you from that, Taj, that's the last day I stepped out of football. That was the last day I strapped it up. It was that summer of 1994 in June. I'll never forget. Never put the uniform on ever again. And then that started a spiral and a tornado of negativity, addiction, and just a lot of bad things transpired in the next 24 years for me.
And I appreciate you being willing to share that, that vulnerable part of what it was like when, you just went into the partying stage. And I've shared before, and we've had several other former athletes share on the podcast before, how that's a lot of what we get into, especially as men, when we're done playing the sport. We don't know how to cope. We don't know what we're dealing with. So what do? You just try to mask it with drugs and alcohol. For me, I always say that I had like an extended college, meaning I came back home and a few of my buddies from high school who all went on to play D1, they were back home, and we just went out and drank, Thursday through Sunday. And, we weren't really looking for jobs. We couldn't get jobs anyway because we had no experience, but there was a ton of partying going on. And I mean, you talked about that stage being 24 years, Walter. Can you just talk about, can you give a little bit more detail about what that stage in your life was like? I mean, how did things start to kind of spiral downwards from there?
Excellent. Yes. So basically what happened is moved back home and with my parents. And what I can say is drinking was always most important to me, right? And so everything evolved around when I could drink. And so basically hanging around unsavory people in the neighborhood and lifelong friends, and they were good people. They just might have been doing bad things. I was a creature of habit. So what I started doing, mixed in with my drinking is smoking of the marijuana and doing that for years, not being able to get a job. Then difficulties with my parents because they were like, hey, you're better than this. Why don't you try to find a job? I didn't want to do anything. And what I can tell you is today, looking back, it was behavioral issues that started way back before I even got to high school, Taj, from untapped trauma that I had faced, right? Like, my family dynamics, raised, I'm the youngest of six, 5 boys and 1 girl. My sister's the oldest, and there was nothing but love, but there was dysfunction in our Black household. It was Christianity. There wasn't any drinking, but what I can say, there was the behavioral issues started with kind of like some traumas from my father and what he would do to my brothers and certain things with like the physical abuse and stuff that I would see. And I really believe what started happening at a young age, I developed behavioral issues. And so I would act out when I went to school. So I can say, I can track back all the way until the 2nd grade. I was 8 years old and I was acting out. You can say, well, I was bussed out to a Black school or whatever. I was taking part in attention-seeking behaviors. And attention-seeking behaviors was like, why do I have to be the class clown? Well, that's the only way Taj is going to recognize me or whatever. And so when I would get in trouble, you could always hear this phone call. My mother, I'm watching the Muppet TV show, and then, maybe have gotten back from basketball practice or whatever it was. And then the next thing you know, I get this call to my mother. When I knew it was a teacher, it was always this. Yes, this is Mrs. Bailey. And immediately, whatever I was doing, it went to doom because it was like the teacher was giving them the report of what I did that day. And so taking that and looking back as I respect back to of the age of 8, fast forwarding to my drinking career started at the age of 14. And then it just slowly progressed, on the weekends and even through college, it picked up. By the time I left college, I'm drinking daily, right? So after football was over, not only drinking daily, it's really drinking at any given moment, right? So with the homies or whatever, and I can tell you it was a level of depression that set in. And then also, I was hurt, I was bitter, I was frustrated because I felt like football quit on me, right? But the reality of it is I made a decision to stop playing. And now that I look back, I was suffering from anxiety. I was suffering from depression. And then the things that I was doing back then was basically masking it, which I thought was helping. So drink more, smoke a little bit more weed. When that didn't work, then you figure a pattern of or a length of time that went by was 6 years. Had a daughter. The next thing I know, I'm not there in her life. I'm trying to work odd and end jobs. That's not working. Never holding a home of my own. Still those behavioral issues. Drink more, do more drugs. Then other substances started coming in by the time I was probably 6 years removed from my last play of football. And for me, man, it was just that steady decline. Um, it just got worse. It got worse and worse. And basically, when it comes to women, what I would do, I would hold hostages. So the couple girlfriends that I had, they weren't girlfriends, they were hostages. It was like, what can I do and what can I take from you? And so that only lasts for so long. And I was able to have two beautiful daughters. And I tell you what, I felt I was cursed on my first daughter. That daughter was out of my life for a long time, and now she's back in my life, and she loves me, and we have our relationship back. But she knows everything about my addiction. I have a 13-year-old now, and so she's in my life, and she didn't know any of my shenanigans back in the day. But I am very clear about I was a person that wasn't very kind when I was younger. And I don't use football as an excuse. It was just certain things that happened to me. And during the time of that tornado, I can tell you is not only becoming homeless, but also not knowing how to reach out to get help. And Taj, that was the worst prison I could have ever been in, that I would not wish upon anybody, especially an African-American athlete that had the world by the tail and full of promise and thinking all of these things, but the expectations didn't align to the need of what I missed out on, right? Which was life. And that's scary because there was a lot of demand, and I met those demands, but then it was a lot of pedestal riding, in the sense of people putting you on a pedestal. And so being on a pedestal, what I found out is I never really developed an identity. And the only identity I really developed was drinking, right? Or partying. You know, you go to school, but I wasn't really engaging in school, because what was happening is it was more, you know how football is, it's grueling. It takes up 10 to 12 hours of your day when you're in school. So man, I was a steward of being the best version of me as a football player at the University of Washington. Man, I was an alpha dog, and I was going to do whatever it took to stay on that field, going through academic probation and all of these things. And so it's very clear for me to see the little nuances where I went wrong. To be drinking but still compete at a high level, I look back, and that's the things today of being able to give to younger student athletes the ability to understand, like, you know, you might go through some storms, but now there's adequate and sufficient help that you can get. Not to say that a young person will listen to that help, but just to know the resources are there. Because I felt there were resources or people I could talk to, but there was just some internally deep things that I wasn't going to share, especially about drinking. I wasn't going to share about drinking because that was the exception, right? Drinking, everybody drank, the coaches drank, right? All of these things, but it was internal issues that I was dealing with that I didn't know how to give to somebody else. And so with you walking around with untapped trauma, and then hey, you feeling like a failure, now you're 6 years removed. There was a point in time I never felt like I was going to go get a gun to kill myself, but there was times I felt like, why am I even existing? Why am I even living? Sometimes I thought, you know what, this world probably would be better off without me. And I felt that a lot. I just felt miserable. I felt out of place, and I felt ashamed, when I was in front of my, family, and, then you got to duck questions of all of these things, and you start lying. And I really wanted to reach out to tell somebody I need some help. And that was the suffering silence portion for 24 years that I went through.
Wow. I just want to say thank you, first of all, Walter, because I know that whoever is listening to this right now, whoever's watching this video, and this is why I wanted to have you on the show. This is exactly why, because everything that you share is so relatable to any athlete transitioning out of their sport. And you just sitting here being willing enough to be that vulnerable, to talk about the dark places, the places you went to, I mean, we haven't even really gotten into the interview yet, and you're already sharing so much. So I really just want to thank you for that. And
Yeah.
one of the things that stood out to me the most is how you were just talking about the childhood trauma, right? You were talking about that a while ago at the beginning, how the behavioral issues from the things you were dealing at home. And I
Mhm.
know so many people listening right now can relate to that, where your sport becomes your outlet for the
Mhm.
things that you're not able to deal with in your personal life. You can take it all out on the field or on the court.
Mhm.
And once once that sport is removed, whether that's early 20s or late 20s, whenever the career ends, now you're faced with all these unprocessed issues from childhood, and you have to deal with these childhood issues as an adult. And for you to, just really dive into that, and I think that was really powerful the way you shared that, and you were able to kind of connect those dots, because a
Mhm.
lot of people may be going through that right now, and we know this, we've talked about this,
Mhm.
especially with the transition. You're going through that transition or losing your identity, but you're not necessarily able to articulate it or pinpoint what's going on. So for
Mhm.
you to outline that, I know you're helping so many people. I want to fast forward and just kind of dive into everything you're doing now.
Mhm.
Obviously, you were able to get out of that storm,
Mhm.
right? What was the point in your life where things really started to shift and you were able to start slowly but surely reaching out for help and pulling yourself out of that dark place? What was that process like?
Yeah. It was a process too, Taj. So something that happened to me, being experiencing homelessness, having my second daughter, it was about 2008. What happened for me, I wound up being kicked out of this drug house, right? A guy I was like staying with and doing all kinds of unsavory things, and bringing food and all of this stuff. And then one day, it was right after New Year's of 2009. He was like, in fact, it was longer than that. It was like Super Bowl, right? So Super Bowl, I think, was what, February usually, or something like that. So after the Super Bowl that morning, he was just like, he looked at me, he said, "Man, what are you doing in my house?" I mean, it was like, I thought he was kidding, but he wasn't. He was like, "Man, you need to go." So from that point, 2009, I have a best friend, and we've been best friends since the second grade. And my best friend got clean and sober in 2006. So we shared all kinds of stuff together, shenanigans and buffoonery and all of that. So I hadn't talked to Matt for years, right, at that particular time. And so what I did was, I called my parents, but I had this tumultuous relationship with my father. At the time, my father had really taken a turn for the worse. I think the prostate cancer was getting him, but he always had this care and concern. But I also had a resentment towards my father because of these other untapped issues that I saw him partake in, and the other things that he did to my brothers. And so I was always blaming, which was doing nothing but fueling the other side of my personality, or the right side of my brain, right? The other portion of my brain, the good side, is dad loves me, dad's trying to help me. So it was a constant battle, right? So he would always come to the rescue. I wound up going into a detox center, and it worked for 4 days. And then once I got out of detox, guess what? It wasn't more than 30 minutes after getting out of the detox center. Here goes Walt drinking again. The best thing that happened during that year was rekindling my friendship with my best friend. He was in recovery. And so I was, I'm not going to say I just jumped in it, because I didn't. I started going through the motion, and I started learning about 12-step programs. And then what happened for me was like, okay, I met some cool people, but they wanted to start like, "Hey, let's go have coffee. Let's go." I'm like, "No, man, I don't want to go with none of y'all people, because you really don't know me. I'm really an athlete that has lost his way. I might only need this for a couple weeks." And I can tell you, I went away for an additional year. And what happened was, I was at rock bottom in a crack house. And when I'm using, what happens is my phone goes off. I don't have money, I don't have nothing. But a moment of clarity I'll never forget, and this is so powerful. There was a girl in my addiction that used to live by me that was getting treatment. She left treatment with another girl, came to this place. That night we partied and all this stuff. That morning we all are still up. And then she calls her sponsor and she goes, "Yeah, I'm at this crack house and I'm here with Walter. And you know what? 12 steps doesn't work. Taj, I BS you not. That was April 28th of 2010. That's the day I got sober, and here's how. When she said that, it was my name, and I was like, who, why are you going? And so after I got through that emotional thing, I said, you know what? That's not true. I saw it work in you. I saw it work in you. And she was like, no, you didn't. And what I told her was, anytime you go away from me in this unsavory place, you get a job, you get a place, you get a car, you get a job, and you get different other things going on that are positive in your life. And when you come around, that just means that you're either celebrating or you're taking a break, right? So you show me every time you go away how things work. And so she whatevered me, took her friend and left. So 10, 15 minutes later, I started crying. And I cried a little bit when she said that, because I said that, I seen it work in you. Anyways, I called my best friend, Taj, and I didn't have a phone. I'm using somebody else's phone. He calls the number back. And once instantaneously, man, I can tell you, this is how my higher power worker, God, works in my life. When I got on the phone and I heard Matt's voice, he said, Walt, I miss you. And I just broke down. And he said, look, I have one requirement. I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to come and get you, but I have one requirement. You need to call your mother and your father, and you tell them that I'm coming to pick you up. And I was like, I don't want to do it. He was like, well, I'm not coming to pick you up. Okay, I'm gonna call him, right? And I did. And he wound up coming and picking me up. Taj, he nursed me back to health. He fed me. I went to recovery meetings, 12-step meetings. And then I got into treatment probably almost a month and a half later, completed that. During that process, my father passed away. I was able to make amends. He got to see me the way he wanted to see me. And from there, man, I hit the ground running. Also during treatment, what I learned was not about trauma, but I learned about my trauma. I learned about the things internally that I was hiding. I learned about the masks. I wore so many different masks. The male masculinity was a big thing. And it was like, am I a gangster? Am I a player? Am I a pimp? All of these things. And those were all facades. The reality was, this delicate, soft flower is really who I am. My true identity is a thoughtful, kind, compassionate person. And that's what I started to develop and started to see, getting back in touch with my emotions and feelings. And since that point, I just gradually have progressed. Now, being in behavioral health for almost 9 years, I get to help other people identify their core issues, whether it's substance use or their lack thereof, in the sense of life skills, right? And it's basically connection first. And then from that, the support that they need to know, which is, everybody knows how much we can tell somebody they can't do something. I pride myself on allowing people that positive space to say, I believe in you and you can do it. And so for me, that's a really big thing, is finding something good about somebody. So you have that one thing that you can always shed light for them. Because, during COVID and all these other things, I've learned that it's hard, like when we're, by ourselves indoors. But I'm very grateful that I have some outlets and resources, somebody like you that I get to bounce ideas off of, people that are doing this great work. But there's so many different things that happen. But that biggest thing for me was my best friend pulling me out of the tar pit at that particular time in 2010. That saved my life.
And thank God for your friend Matt, who was able to help, tell you he was going to call your folks. I think it's also beautiful that you shared that you were able to make amends with your father before he passed. Mm-hmm. And once you got yourself clean and you're able to go through all the programs and do the internal healing, not just the healing from the substances and everything, but the healing emotionally. I'm curious to know, did you know right away that you wanted to go into behavioral health? How did you start to find your direction? Because you see this a lot, and I know we both see this with the athletes, the former athletes we have conversations with. Of course, that first step before we start talking about what do you want to do with your career, what do you see for yourself after the game and all that? There's a healing that has to take place. And a lot of times once the healing happens, it's like, okay, I'm healed. I'm okay. I'm no longer an athlete, but now I have no idea what I want to do. So how did you start to map out your direction? I think that would be valuable for the listeners to hear.
Yeah. Well, the great question. I think what happened for me was I love the whole treatment atmosphere. Like when I was in treatment, I'm not going to lie to you to say, oh, from treatment, I was like destined to be a counselor. No, that is not it. I fell in love with learning about me and behaviors. Oh man, it was the greatest gift to understand why I was acting the way that I did. Because I was clueless, but disconnect from my feelings and emotions. So once I learned that, I learned dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy. It just changed my world. But I think the biggest thing for me getting into behavioral health was I was working at the treatment center after getting 2 years of sobriety that I completed treatment. And I just fell in love with my first job because it was my first job and I was sober. So I get really fired up when it comes to sobriety. And then after being there a year, I get approached by a counselor because there was another African-American younger counselor that relapsed. And I didn't want to be a counselor, but they said, hey, we need you. And it was an older white woman, and she used to call me Walder. Her name is Shirley, Miss Shirley J. And Shirley was like, Walder, now we need you now. And I would never ask you to do something that I wasn't willing to help you and guide you along. And I was like, Taj, I said, Miss Shirley, I would do it, but I like what I'm doing. She said, we're going to pay you more money. Oh, okay. so they suckered me. They suckered me in a little. They didn't, but they needed me to do it. So I wouldn't suggest what I did. I still to this day, people say, well, you're good at doing it. I learned on the job. I love behavioral health because behavioral health, I've learned now, not only just about myself, but I learned now the way of connection with people and then finding those different caveats of interventions that work best for people. Because it's never anything that I do. Early on in my profession, anybody that stayed sober, it was like I wanted to be a part of that success. I had nothing to do with it. It was internal and individual. And so what I know now is after working for 9 years in it, it's given me the opportunity now, as you said, the healing process internally, but I look at mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I was like, what about the other Walter Baileys out there? And so that I started talking to some doctors and licensed mental health therapists. They were like, whoa, you need to go into the space that you know even better than this, which is student athletes. And so I was like, huh? And they were like, there are so many people. When I look at African Americans, what really caught my eye was finding out African American male athletes kill themselves the most out of any culture. And when I found that out, Taj, I said, I have to do something. And I wasn't just going bonsai by myself on a mission to save the world. It was like I had these conversations with my higher power, my wife, and some trusted people of like, I am ready to do some different type of work. I want to stay in that realm, but I want to go help people like me that don't have that voice, that'll get stuck, or they might have that potential to get stuck, and they just need to know that there will be some outlets and some resources that they can tap into before you go down that road. Because there's even some things of our former athletes that were shot and killed by the police, which for me is a form of suicide, because these people played college football, maybe even in the NFL, but because of them being a threat to law enforcement use what? Deadly force. So there's a lot of just different things. And so that's what kind of prompted me to do what I'm doing now with Dynamic Athlete Solutions, is providing this safe space and opportunities for other former athletes to learn how to be a dynamic coach, but also, put together seminars for coaches, athletic administration, and athletic trainers, right? Because athletic trainers are the ones that hear the juicy content from the athletes. They'll go to an athletic trainer before they'll go to a student advisor, right? Or a coach. The coach is going to be the last person they go to. So just finding out that there's some areas that we can infuse education, still have a cultural specific component of skilled trainings that we can bring to the table. But at the end of the day, it's just echoing the message of there's different supports out there that this is needed. And so many people are doing stuff from, athlete services. And so I just think all of us working together for the greater good, it's going to be phenomenal. So I appreciate the work that you do. And for me to understand why I want to be in this lane of doing what I do, because I see data is a big thing that we can't see on substance use and mental health for student athletes. We need to be collecting more and more data so we are well informed and people are well informed of issues and challenges that do arise. Because I hate reading about an African-American athlete just getting kicked out of school just because he had an open container or it was his third strike. Sometimes the third strike doesn't mean it should be his last opportunity, but the interventions that some of these colleges and universities implement are not structured for African Americans. If you don't conform, then you got to fly or you got to say goodbye. We have to get beyond that without fighting with these universities, but showing them the infusion process of skilled trainings that can be brought to them. That's what Dynamic Athlete Solutions hopes to provide.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And one of the most amazing things about you reaching this point with everything you're doing with Dynamic Athlete Solutions is that you just started with helping people, and that is a common theme that keeps popping up time and time again, not only on this show and the people that I bring on, but just in life with people you see are successful or doing heart-centered work or doing work that has an impact on people. It starts out with, how can I help people right now? And it just evolves and it grows and you start looking for different ways to serve and different opportunities. And I think it's amazing that you shared that, how you got to that place. I think that's really powerful. And I wanted to ask you too, what do you think is, what is the future of Dynamic Athlete Solutions? Or, this is kind of a two-part question, but what is the future of Walter Bailey in general and everything that you have planned ahead?
Well, the future, I think what I would love to do is I would like to, definitely on the West Coast, I would like to have an implementation of services in the Power Five, definitely in the Pac-12, whether it's a component where we have conferences for all the coaching staff and student athletes biannually or annually, but a couple times a year, definitely being a visible presence for every college, actually on the West Coast. I mean, it could be NAIA. It doesn't matter. It's in high schools as well. I think a big thing that I left out is we're going to have former athletes that we will train to be dynamic coaches, right? So they'll be well-versed in mental health, substance use disorder, know about suicide ideation and cultural diversity and inclusion. And all that means is that you're not going to be diagnosing, but you know how to go spread this message to say, look, if we create more awareness, then we can help and we can assist more student athletes, right? Because that's the biggest thing. It's assisting and supporting and the ability to connect. That is the biggest thing. So I look at, in the future, that's what I would like to do. But at the end of the day, I think we're still putting the groundwork and the foundation and building this. We're trying to add the rebar right now because it's going to be all hands on deck. I think the big thing for us is creating an opportunity that people not only can hear and see what we do, but understand that it is a need, right? So we want to be very intentional, but we want to be specific. So we're coming at it of that angle for, African American athletes, but realistically, this is going to be for all athletes, right? But we just know the need for African American skilled trainings in certain areas is what is needed, especially in a lot of these white big universities. The structural dynamics is just in place, and we don't want to change their structural dynamics of that. What we want to do is help them implement some things that are thoughtful and kind for all cultures instead of one size fits all. That is not the case. Everybody does not learn the same, right? So helping people to get to a place of success might look different for you and it might look different for me, but it's not us to be the deciding factor. It's allowing that space for that person to navigate, right? They just need a lane and we need to be the boundary, right? So that's what I believe in, is being the boundary, but also allowing young student athletes to find their way. Because you know how it is. If you tell an athlete, no, you can't do this, I'm gonna go do it because you said not to, right? Because you said not to. I'm gonna go do it. Instead of being like, hey, here's the risk, here's the reward, right? You get to choose. So they're making well-informed decisions on the choices that they get to make. That to me is pretty cool, because the other thing is, okay, you make that mistake again, you're going to get kicked off this team.
Right.
That's the common thing that we've heard before. So not trying to change coaches, but I think for coaches, I think they might have a break. They might breathe a sigh of relief to know we will be able to work with them. So coaches have a hard time, right? Because they have to coach, game plan, recruit. And then when you have a student athlete that is experiencing behavioral issues, substance use issues, then it's like, okay, they got to stop what they're doing and whatever. Why not have the GA or these other entities that can come in and help the coaches understand, like, look, when you have these things, what are the other avenues or other outline support areas that we can draw from? Because sometimes internally in universities, they've got all these people that are supposed to help. But what we found out with data is it's not always the most adequate and efficient help. No disrespect to them. Sometimes they might have to outsource their services and inquire about some other things that can help some of their student athletes, instead of you just giving up on somebody that you told their parents that you were going to take care of for 4 years.
Man, that part right there, right? you tell us they're going to take care of you for years, and then they kick you to the curb if you have some type of issues going on, rather than meeting you where you're at and having systems in place. That's who we could do a whole separate episode on that, Walter. But I know you said you're in the ground stages of Dynamic Athlete Solutions. Obviously, you've been able to share with everyone all the amazing work that you're doing and going to continue to do. How can people get in touch? How can people support? How can people find out more about what you're doing so they can start implementing this into their programs?
They can reach us on our website, www.dynamicathletesolutions.com. And I think a big thing too is we want to get with as many people as we can. I think right now there's no big me's and little you's. I believe this: any former student athlete, we can do some work together, because everybody has experience. If you've been a student athlete, and we're even saying even in high school, like people, you and I know a bunch of people that are stuck from playing high school, and some that was like, man, Taj, if I wouldn't have did this and that, man, I would have been out there too. And so sometimes it's almost like reaching them and allowing them the space to say, you know what? I have permission to pivot now, right? So we can use them as resources too, because there's nobody that should be left behind. There's people that think that they should have made it, and realistically, I think that's a form of trauma, of being stuck in the past, right? And it's like, how do we help those athletes, right? And so with former college student athletes, former professional student athletes coming back, but doing the work, because there's a lot of people that want to give back. So donating their time, of being able to know, like, hey, with these different strategies that we have, we just know we keep it simple. Connection, being able to be open, but also knowing to stay in the lane that you are given, which is, if you have experience in a certain area, we want those people to stay in those areas, because when you have areas where people can understand or relate to, then that's how you can have that better conversation and connection. So for me, I was pretty lucky, man. I had substance use issues, behavioral issues, mental health. So I touch on all of that. So I got a conglomerate of things, but we have people that are specialized in just the mental health stuff that they've, experienced and went through. And I really believe it's really good that they get to stay in their space, because there are going to be so many people that experience that. There's a lot of people that don't have substance use in their story, right? So they have to stay in the lane that they feel the most comfortable with.
Right, man. That's some solid insight right there, Walter. I appreciate you sharing that. I definitely want to be respectful of your time. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing with our audience. Your story is a powerful one, no doubt. I know, like I said earlier, people are going to be able to see themselves in your story, be able to learn from it, heal from it, grow from it. And we're going to have you back on the show, because I know we really only scratched the surface of some things that we could have discussed today. But I really do appreciate you, Walter, not only for coming on and sharing, but for being a big brother to me in this work. And I know we're just getting started with helping and serving the athlete community. So
yes,
we appreciate you coming on.
You got it. Anytime, man. Thank you, and keep up the great work, Taj. I'm so proud. I'm inspired. And we do this stuff together. What you're doing is instrumental, and that's the whole thing, is continuing to support each other, man. And so I'm going to continue to be a big cheerleader. But I also know, like you're just you just got the it factor. So just keep doing it the way that you're doing it, man. And let's do it together.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you.
You got it, man. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning. Thank you. This has been another great episode of Thrive After Sports and the Power of Story podcast with Mr. Walter Bailey. Please tap in with this man, follow what he's doing, visit the Dynamic Athlete Solutions website, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.